We also welcome Sheila, who's got a very powerful message for us today. So thank you, Sheila. Over to you for today's message.
Well, thank you, Bill. Good morning, everyone. Well, this is a big one. It's only in certain circles that we can talk openly about this most personal aspect of our inner experience and its mysteries. Our power of faith is closely linked to the deepest possible relationship we have with the divine source and depends heavily on our realization of the extent and depth of that connection. Faith is an interesting dynamic because it seems to straddle two levels of mind, which is actually, of course, the one mind. This connection exists within the true interior of the self, which is our primary identity and the most intimate and important aspect of our being. And when we discover the very center of consciousness lies within us and that we all have unrestricted access to it, the choices we have about the way in which we can live are completely changed. Obviously, faith is very important. And we really need to know more about what faith means for us personally. Just where do our inner convictions really come from? If we do not have immediate answers to these questions, we are well advised to peel back the layers of our thinking and spend some time in self-examination, because there is scarcely anything more crucial in determining our passage through this process of life than faith, because faith relates to every aspect of creation and consciousness, and our level of personal prosperity will be directly proportional to our awareness of the power of faith and its link to a higher power and the power of creation. We need to understand also how to engage all these powers in the right way. Many people have pinned their hopes on the arrival of a vaccine in 2021 in the expectation that this will automatically provide the improvement to our present circumstances that we all deeply desire. Some believe that we will, at some point, return to the way of life we had before. The idea of a return is very appealing and comfortable, but in the meantime, things are constantly changing, and we may be wise to realize that we are currently in a liminal space between the two worlds of a familiar past and whatever the future may bring. So, we are going to need a certain amount of spiritual preparedness to venture forward into 2021 with our faith. Of course, faith is most useful to us when we are wrapped in a thick fog of complexity and uncertainty, and we cannot see any way ahead. It can demand walking around in the darkness for a time because we don't know the answers and we cannot see how to get ourselves out of this trouble. At a most basic level, we need to remember the deep wisdom of the Hebrew tradition. This too shall pass. It is clear that if we place our faith solely on our own abilities, we will soon be confronted by the reality that some things are just beyond our personal capacity to manage on our own. The psychic load is too heavy, and we cannot survive this way for very long. And really, at the end of the day, why would we wish to limit ourselves? The good news is that we do not have to live this way, in a state of separation from the divine. When we know how, we can engage our power of faith to assist us. Ironically, the calamity that befell us in 2020 drew me magnetically straight into an increased focus on this eternal wellspring of impersonal and unlimited power at the divine center. How fortunate I knew how to retreat to this place, where I could allow myself to draw stamina from the infinite field of the divine presence and its omnipotence that overcomes all things. Retreat is an interesting term. A military retreat is a maneuver designed to improve a strategic position in a competitive situation. It can also be an evasive action that is taken when forces are in disarray and likely to be overwhelmed. And it is also a prudent move to retire and regroup and possibly change tactics. Nowadays, people go on spiritual retreat to refresh and re-energize, openly acknowledging their need to restore their vision and vitality by withdrawing from the outer world for a while. One thing they can do during this time of withdrawal is to reaffirm their faith and begin anew. If we have the courage to take on a self-directed search in relation to faith, we often find it unevenly developed. We may have strong faith in some areas, but much less faith in others. If we are thorough, we will want to account for this and do what we can to correct the thinking that creates the difference and imbalance. If we look more closely, we may find that our faith is also variable according to our positive or negative experiences, and the temptation may be to gloss over what we find. But really, there is nothing to be ashamed about because this is a common situation. We all have pockets of doubt and distrust and unconscious thought patterns. And if we persevere, we can uncover these beliefs and attitudes that have passed us by unnoticed. This is enormously helpful in clearing away the things that block our growth and development. Motivation enough, I think, to consider continuously monitoring our outlook on the world. And the ongoing benefit of bringing our deepest beliefs into conscious awareness is that we can decide what works for us in the present and what would be better discarded. Our questions can address beliefs we hold around key areas. What do we make of this overall business of life and living? Do we find life enjoyable, or is it mostly a struggle? What do we believe about the world in which we live?
Well, we seem to have lost the sound there, Sheila. Can you say something? We've lost your sound. So I don't. How, there you are. That's it. If you just go back a paragraph.
Uh,
Are you covering the mic with your papers?
no, I have no papers at all.
Okay.
I don't know what to go back to.
Doesn't matter. You're doing fine. Thank you.
Okay, I asked some questions about the business of life and living and what we believe about the world we live in and what beliefs we hold about each other and ourselves. But the important question of all is around the beliefs that we hold in relation to the existence of a higher power and its essential character. For example, do we believe life is on our side, or do we feel disempowered by a strong force that seems and tends to work against our best intentions? The answers to these questions will give much greater clarity about where we stand in relation to faith. It is easy enough to make a sweeping statement of general agreement that there is a higher power, but it is quite possible to say we believe in a vague way, and yet to have only a remote and uncertain idea about precisely what that power is. The best indicator as to the depth and location of your faith is to ask yourself whether your views change when something does not go well. This is the crunch question, and depending on your answer, you will be able to determine whether you have been relying on blind faith, which is almost equivalent to wishful thinking, or an active and understanding faith, which comes from a knowledge of the spiritual principles how to apply them and have them work on our own behalf. Even so, it is quite possible to put these principles to work mechanically and to some degree obtain gratifying and successful results in various quarters of our lives. Some early New Thought leaders, including Charles Myrtle Fillmore and Emily Cady, actually encouraged everyone to experiment with the practice of denials and affirmations, mechanically at first if necessary, and to persist until they became convinced that the principles really worked. But even though the mechanical experimentation with techniques and rote formulas will probably improve our lives and often increase our interest in spiritual principles, some people will not go further on their spiritual journey, while many others experience a progressive awakening to the deeper mysteries of faith and affirmative prayer. That this relatively superficial mechanical approach still improves someone's life is of value. But if this is all that lies behind our claim to faith, then our faith is not well developed, suggesting that we have probably not yet experienced the profound mystical communion with the divine within. In fact, we can come to spiritual life in various ways, and as the Buddhists like to say, there are many paths up the mountain. So the entry point into a growing understanding of the non-dimensional world of spirit is not what is important. It is our growth and development and the actions that result from the deepening of our faith that really matters as we learn to live consciously with the divine presence and actively adopt its implications. If our faith isn't based on a knowing from this deepest core of identity, the Christ consciousness, it is more likely to be associated with the realm of belief. And beliefs are not eternally true or lasting. They are personal and transient and can change in the blink of an eye as soon as we become aware of more information or glimpse another reality, like Saul on the road to Damascus, before he became Paul. A name change to mark his change in consciousness. I have heard beliefs described as merely the thoughts we habitually think. Just because we think them does not make them true. Our thoughts may be based on opinions that are not even necessarily our own, so they don't have to be difficult to change. If we decide our views do not serve us at the highest level, we do not have to keep them. However, if the source of our faith is really an inner felt intuitive experience of a higher realm of being, that gives us an immediate platform for accessing an immense power beyond the grasp of reason and human comprehension. The faith that emanates from this source can be engaged to work mysteriously on our behalf. As long as we ask for what we desire in the most effective way, it is comforting to know that this power will work to meet our request. We must only remember to invite its invisible action into our lives and to place our trusting faith in its hidden processes, because it can work out how best to fulfill our request for the good of all. When we make our request and plant a seed, it must then be allowed to work itself into visibility in its own way, in divine order. We must be willing to recognize an acceptable solution that may surprise us because it involves something we had not previously imagined. So we must be willing to be flexible. But what is offered usually leads us to some much greater good that we had also not imagined. And it is amazing how often this happens. In Unity, we invite everyone to take the time to become quiet and to feel into their deepest sense of who we are at our very core, where we find the truth of being, where there is a profound sense of well-being and wholeness that has nothing to do with the outside world of activity. When you find this sacred place, the secret place of the Most High, we can return to it as often as possible to find this inexplicable sense of fulfillment that floods our minds and hearts. In unity, we call this going into the silence, where nothing is required, nothing is lacking or needed. Everything exists in its unformed state of potentiality and possibility. The silence is a state of harmony and balance, goodness and bounty. Nothing need be said to appreciate what is conveyed to us through our heart center. Spirit opens us to love and acceptance of divine order and all that is. The limitations of ego and personality no longer exist. Living from this place is our biggest challenge and greatest sanctuary. The divine becomes a power partner, able to work miracles on our behalf in ways we could never imagine or orchestrate through our own thinking. We do not have to decide how our prayers will be answered. This is not abrogating responsibility. It is quite the opposite. It is allowing the greater wisdom of the divine to act unimpeded. We can confidently express gratitude that the need will be met, the desire fulfilled in perfect ways for the highest good. We must only receive and follow any intuitive guidance and wisdom that enters our mind. Spiritual faith is probably one of the most difficult topics to discuss with anyone, deeply challenging our linguistic constructs and powers of expression. We cannot convey to another the precise quality of their private experience of this power. We are like the monkeys, pointing at the reflection of the moon in the water rather than to the moon itself. Even so, our telling of our own experience will not make much sense to the person who has not had a direct revelation of spiritual truth, which is an entirely intimate and private encounter. It is only the symbolic language of metaphor that helps us get anywhere near what we would like to communicate. And at the end of the day, we are just standing in awe of the great mystery of being. Intellectual capacity cannot get us there. Faith is more a quality of heightened feeling than anything else, but it is not an emotion. It is a choice generated by an experiential understanding of the divine. At best, I would say it is more like an opening to another dimension. Our temporal perspectives and boundaries no longer apply, and we find ourselves in an experience of connection with something so intimate, all-powerful, and deep, it defies containment. As a result of contact with this presence, all discord, limitation, and concern just drops away. And these things no longer dominate our thinking. It is undoubtedly the peace that passes all understanding. Our focus just shifts. It is as if we float outside our embodied experience, which becomes a minor consideration within a grand cosmic and universal perspective of oneness that may bring tears of gratitude to us as a sense of willing surrender to the entirety of life gives us a feeling of freedom like no other. We feel an inexpressible joy within the fullness of being. Of course, I can only describe this through the lens of my experience. You might choose other words, but ultimately we would be reaching for the same thing. It would only be the expression that differs. However, if you have not experienced anything like this, then nothing anyone will ever say will make it real for you. We all have to go there on our own, and the more we have of these encounters, the less we can turn away. They change us. They blow out the walls of our little lives and our personal stories fall apart. They blow away the boundaries of any form of littleness as we realize the divine is all encompassing. And even though we are individual expressions of this divine power, the individual part does not matter nearly as much as the whole and what is being expressed through us as the divine energy comes into form. At the human level, we often try to rely on our human strength and soldier on and endure and to make things happen. But Jesus introduced another way. We can borrow from this divine source, the power of being itself, omnipotent, eternally true, and ever existent. Bring your burdens unto me, was the message. The human personality does not have to carry its load alone. We can learn to let go mentally in this expanded, non-dimensional spiritual space. We can release our cares in faith that there will be a reconciliation of the issue and that we do not have to engineer this outcome on our own. With faith, we can give up our immediate anxieties to the higher power, which works only for good. Once again, this is the argument. Because we only perceive things through the limited frames of fixed mindsets and emotions, even our best thinking is constrained and limited. With faith and clear intention, we know that taking our hands off the driving wheel immediately opens up the field to a broader range of possibilities and outcomes. The divine principle of creation can then operate freely. It is a wonderful thing to come to accept our limitations. It is both humbling and comforting to know that there is this mysterious force that acts in unfailing support of our heartfelt desires and intentions whenever we ask it to in prayerful contemplation. It changes the whole approach to living to know that there is a responsive element that can partner with us. Jesus said, I and the Father are one, and stressed it was the Father, the higher power within, that did the work. His faith invoked this higher power, but we were told we could do exactly the same. If we know the way this process works so well on our behalf, it must surely encourage us to bring this faith into our everyday decisions and to elevate the role of spiritual guidance. We only need to surrender our egoic mind in favor of the divine consciousness. It is a simple decision, but one we must constantly remind ourselves about. It requires attention. It requires we step back from our immediate reaction to do something. We need to take some time apart, as Jesus did on a regular basis, to anchor ourselves in the I am center of our being, from where we receive the best possible guidance through this unfailing inner knowing. This is not simply meditation. It is something more deliberate and consciously active. It is calling on this power as an intentional step. Emily Cady called this a choice between bondage or liberty. And in the words of John, you will know the truth and the truth will make you free. In other words, you will have the faith not to try to handle all matters from the purely human perspective when there is a much more powerful way through active faith. Namaste. I was going to say something about Phyllis's class, but that's already been mentioned. And I would simply encourage anyone who would like to learn about unity to do this. It is such a brilliant introduction to all that we deal with in our unity New Thought teachings. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. And words of wisdom there. What a great title it was to the mystery of faith. And of course, faith is our power of the month at the moment. And words of wisdom there for us to reflect on. And it's good to know we're not alone. We have that inner guidance, that Great Spirit with us. And we've picked a great song.